Well, hello there! I hope you're having an amazing day, my friend! And today, if you remember our discussion from the previous video, we are going to extend our knowledge about variable shadowing and also cover it in real-life scenarios so you know how it basically looks like in practice. Now, I have a very interesting discussion starter for you. If we can shadow any variable and that way update its value, even though the variable was defined as immutable, what is the point of having mutable variables? Why just not shadow variables and update their versions like that? Well, that is because shadowing has its very significant downsides when compared to mutable variables. And let me explain what are those. So basically, when you are creating a shadow of a certain variable, you are going to create another memory location in which this new variable is going to be stored. So instead of having one variable with updated value later on, you will have two separate variables, and those two variables will coexist at any moment of time, but you will not be able to reach the first one. So only the second one will be reachable, but that doesn't change the fact that both values do exist in memory, and memory is allocated for both variables. And the second downside to using shadowing when it compared to mutable variables is the fact that execution time will suffer. That is because updating an existing variable is much easier of a task for our CPU when compared to creating a new variable and assigning a new value to it. And when you think about it, it's expected behavior, because when our CPU needs to create a new variable, it has to do a lot of tasks. It needs to push another memory location on stack. It needs to figure out how much memory it needs to allocate. It needs to see what type of data it is working with, and then it's going to push the data to stack. And in the case of updating, its job is already cut out for it. It just needs to update the set of bytes that are stored in stack memory at the moment, nothing more. So it just jumps to that location and updates the value. Hence, the better performance. But take that with a grain of salt, because there certainly are situations where variable shadowing is beneficial for us. And let me give you an example for that. Woohoo! We are back in Visual Studio Code! In the previous video, we did not pay it a visit, and our Visual Studio Codes got really sad about it. So right now, I feel like we really need to give it some love. And there is no better way to do it than to talk about variable shadowing in practice. Of course, we're going to start from the regular step, and that is to create a new project and open our main RS file. Now that we are in our main RS file and in our main function, we are going to start things off by just creating a new variable called test. And why not print the value that is inside of it? At this point, you know that test variable is immutable. You remember it from our discussion about variables. If you do not, I thoroughly recommend you to go back to that video and refresh your memory, because it's very important to have that understanding right now. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, I think we can start doing something like this. And you know that this is not allowed. We are not allowed to reassign a value to immutable variable. So when I run cargo build, we'll get an error. And we do. And our compiler is so pleasant that it tells us exactly what the problem is. And it says that we are not allowed to assign a value twice to an immutable variable, which we already knew, right? But now let me add just a tiny difference here. I'm going to add a let keyword before we assign a value for the second time. And when I save it and I run cargo build, we get no errors. So let's see what result we actually get here. I want you to think about it, so pause the video here and think about the potential result you expect to find here. And And when we run cargo build, we get exactly what we expected, right? Awesome job there! Now, I feel like we have enough understanding about shadowing to actually discuss the topic that I promised you that we will right now, and that is to see in which scenarios it actually is beneficial to use variable shadowing. Now, we are going to work on imaginary project of ours. We want to create text editor application. And in this application, you want to allow your users to specify how many spaces each tab should introduce. You need to allow customers to specify that number themselves. And why ask them to enter a number when you can ask them to enter spaces? Maybe they want to see how long the spaces are going to be. And we are going to assign it to our imaginary variable called spaces here. Of course, in our case, we are not going to handle input of data. I just want to show you what the general idea is here and to go through our imaginary project together. When we have our spaces in the variable called spaces, we would like to calculate how many spaces actually are inside of it. And to do that, we have a very useful method for strings, which is called len. And that method is going to return a number of characters. I mean, basically it's bytes, but let's not go too deep here. We are going to talk about strings in much detail in future lessons, so do not pay any attention to this right now. But len method is going to return a number to us. And when it does that, we need to save it somewhere. So why not try the previous discussion and make our spaces variable mutable and try to save this number inside of it. And when we have done that, let's run cargo build and we get an error because we are trying to save a number inside of a string variable. Our spaces variable is already defined with string data type, so you cannot change that. So when you try to update the value with the wrong type, the compiler will not allow it. So we have basically two options here. The first one is to create a completely new variable that is going to have a unique name to itself. And in this case, it can be number of spaces or something like that. And the second option is going to be to shadow the spaces variable and to save that number of spaces inside of it. That would be a better approach here, I would say, because it's going to be more intuitive. If we think about it, we as developers are not going to be interested so much to work with the actual string that contains spaces. We want to be working with a number of spaces that we're supposed to be convert our tabs into. So it's much more meaningful to have only a number and not that string variable. So by shadowing it, we're not going to lose any significantly important data. And when we have done that, let's run this program of ours. And as you can see, we get 4 as a result, which is the exact number of spaces that we have in our string variable. And let me show you that I'm not lying. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 spaces, and we got the result 4. So basically, we did our task well. So the whole purpose of this example right now was just to show you that variable shadowing can be very beneficial at times because it's much more intuitive to developers that we are not interested in string itself, but that we only care about the number of spaces that was inside of it. So I hope that you liked this explanation. And if nothing else, we at least gave some love to our Visual Studio Code. And now, ladies and gentlemen, after a very difficult fight, I hope that we managed to conquer variable shadowing together. I hope that you found this video useful and even more so meaningful. And if you did, I would like to ask you a favor again. I would really appreciate if you could subscribe to this channel and like this video, because that would really help out both me and the channel to grow, and thank you in advance for doing that. In our next video, we are going to talk about a very important topic. We are going to cover data types. And If you do not know what this is, or you're not sure that your understanding of the topic is really solid, I thoroughly recommend you to join that video, because it's going to be so beneficial and so essential for our future journey with Rust. And right now, I would like to wish you an amazing day. Goodbye!